Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to today's show, Dave. We've got Mr. Lloyd Pye on. Yeah, interesting. We're going to do two books, Star Child's Essentials and Intervention Theory Essentials. And yeah, we're going to have an interesting chat, Dave.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess normally we read some bios out, but I'm going to get Lloyd to talk about his bio before because it's probably more fluid that way. So we'll bring Lloyd straight on. Hi, Lloyd.
Well, hi, guys. It's a pleasure to be with both of you. And the weather here on the beach of Florida is pretty doggone nice, so suffer, baby, suffer.
Nice. I like your sense of humor, Lloyd. Okay, Lloyd, just give us a little bit about your background, as much as you like, really, because it's much better coming from the person, and I'm sure you're probably sick of your bio being read out on shows as well. So
actually, I need to do a new bio. I'm creating a new website as we speak.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, so the old one, things are really changing in my world, in my life at the moment. The Star Child, because I've been working on it for 14 years now and have not been able to get it to the place that it needs to be to get the money for the research that needs to be done on it, I've turned it over basically to some business types in Tampa. I live in Florida on the Panhandle. Tampa's in the southern part of the state. So those people are much better skilled, much better experienced at handling the business end of things, and they're developing a formal limited liability corporation to handle all the things. And of course that allows for transparency of funding and all the things that I was very limited by, plus the fact that I just have no money, just
sure
live on a shoestring, as so many of us in this field do. And so they will be able to pay the money that's required to do the legal things. So with all that happening, the Star Child and the Star Child website is uncoupling, and they're going to completely revamp it and put it into a modern format. The websites that I have are literally 10-year-old software called Front Page, and they don't work with the handhelds, the handheld devices. So we're just we're killing ourselves by not being up to this. So they are revamping the Star Child website as we speak, and I am therefore I'm revamping my own personal Lloyd Pye website, excuse me, as we speak. And in doing that, I will uncouple from the Star Child. Not my connection. I'll always talk about it like we're going to talk about it today and all that. But I'm going to now refocus also on my other work that we're also going to talk about,
sure,
intervention theory and hominoids and things like that. So it's a very major transition point for me in my career, and particularly my internet presence, because things are just going to change rather profoundly in that sense by the end of this month. And I'm coming to England to spend 2 months, all of August and all of September, in London and with a friend in Highgate at her house, and I will be there to do lectures as well. So if anybody wants to sign me up to do a lecture where they are, get in touch with me, Lloyd Pye, LLOYDPYE @gmail.com, and I'll be happy to discuss that with you. Now, that's not really much of a bio. That's really kind of where I am now. But as far as the bio goes, I am a graduate of a university called Tulane in New Orleans. I'm a Louisiana native, born and raised there. I grew up to write. I wrote for a while fiction, and then I was in Hollywood for a decade in the 80s, trying to make it as a screenwriter, and just doing those things, but all the while working on hominoids, my interest in hominoids, which is Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, and all that. So that became my first love and my first great passion in the field of alternative. alternative knowledge. So I branched out from there into what has become intervention theory, and wrote a book in '97 called Everything You Know Is Wrong. And through the course of '98, that book put me on the map in the field of alternative knowledge, really worldwide. It was just for me, it was overnight. So in '99, a couple had heard about me and heard about what I was doing and the kind of lectures that I was presenting, and they had a skull that they felt was very likely the skull of a gray alien. And so they contacted me and asked me would I come by and take a look at it, which I did in late February of '99. And from that time, '99, the Star Child just sort of took over what I was doing. And for the last 14 years, that has been my primary objective, is to get the Star Child recognized for what it is, which I didn't agree with them at first because, what are the odds on a gray alien skull being in the possession of a couple in El Paso, Texas? But over time, as I took it to experts, and then later as we did DNA analysis of it, it began to look more and more and more like it really was, in fact, not human, and was indeed an alien of some kind, whether it was a gray or whatever. But it has all the typical hallmarks, the physical hallmarks of a gray alien, and it's a real true bone skull. It isn't a hoax or a fraud or anything like that. It's a real deal. And it produces DNA that you can analyze, and that DNA, when it comes out, is very, very, very different from human DNA. And in fact, in many ways, it's different from any DNA on Earth so far that we know of. So that's kind of it, and not a nutshell, in a very drawn out way. That's kind of who I am, what my background is, and where things are with me now.
Sure, Lloyd. I first came across you through the Star Child. That would have been my route into your work, and I didn't know about the Bigfoot stuff that you'd done or anything else, so I landed in the middle of it in the Star Child. How did you come to possession of the Star Child? How did that come about, Lloyd? Maybe just tell us that, a little bit of the background.
Excuse me. Well, as I said, Ray and Melanie Young of El Paso, when they got the skull, there was two skulls, really. They were found together in a mine tunnel in about 1930. The Star Child, the one that's come to be called the Star Child, at first was just considered a deformed human skull of some kind. But so to all the people that saw it and dealt with it from 1930, when the girl found them, till she was dying in the early 90s, and gave it to some friends, and those friends eventually 5 years later gave them to Ray and Melanie. All the people up until then, to Ray and Melanie, thought that it was just a deformed human of some kind, because that's what anyone would think, really. I would imagine.
Sure. Then
when Melanie saw them, it just so happened that Melanie had been a neonatal nurse for 12 years. And as a neonatal nurse, she had become very familiar with human deformity. And she knew that this was not that. This was something entirely different. It was way too light. It was much too symmetrical. Every part of it that she could see was different from a human. And in fact, it has turned out that all 25 of the major points of reference on a human skull are different on the Star Child. There's not a single one where you can say, oh, they're exactly the same. It's just completely and totally, from a physical standpoint, it couldn't be more different, and it is. So Melanie and Ray were also members of MUFON in El Paso MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. So they had an interest in UFOs, and they had a knowledge about it. So Melanie said, I think it's the skull of a gray alien. So she took it out to some mainstream scientists there in El Paso, 3 of them, I think, all of whom told her, oh, no, this is just a cradle-boarded hydrocephalic, nothing to it, nothing unusual. Just take it home and forget about it. Get rid of it if you want to. There's nothing special about this. Well, Melanie knew that was a lie, in all 3 cases. So he realized that the mainstream was not going to treat it fairly, not going to treat it as anything special, because this is not something that mainstream science wants to deal with. They just don't want to deal with alien reality because it's going to change their world so dramatically. So they do everything they can to keep that genie in the bottle for as long as they can. So she then wanted somebody that would take it seriously as possibly a gray alien. So she went to the next MUFON, which was, I think, December of '98, and she asked, who in the field of alternative knowledge deals with skulls? And by then, I was very well known for my intervention and hominoid lectures. And the hominoid lectures dealt with skulls, with the skulls of prehumans, and I did a lot of skull work in my presentation. So someone who had seen me do that told them about me, and they said, okay, he's our guy, let's try to get him. So they contacted me in New Orleans. I was living in New Orleans at the time, and said, next time you're in our area, would you come by? We'd like to show you something. I said, sure. I thought it was going to be Bigfoot related or, hominoid related. Something. I did. And so I was very shocked when they pulled that skull out of the box.
What was your first reaction, Lloyd, to the skull?
Well, it was just the most radically different skull I'd ever seen. And my father had been an optometrist, was still then an optometrist, but he was ultimately for about 50 years before he retired. So I knew a lot about eyes for sure, and these eyes were absolutely radically different, a radical redesign of the human eye. And so that really caught my attention. But then everything else about it was very unusual. I knew enough about skulls to know how unusual it was, how thin the bone was, how light it was. I did not at that time know how hard it is. I thought it was fragile because it was so thin and so light. Turns out it's very, very durable bone, much more durable than our bone. So, much harder to cut than our bone. So I was impressed. I had to admit that I had never seen anything like it. But by the same token, I had a hard time imagining that I was holding a real, true alien skull in my hands. It's like I told them. I said, "Geez, if this thing is real, this is like finding the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is a big deal."
Yeah.
But I don't think it is. But I'm willing to go out there and try to find an answer for sure, because this needs an answer. And so that's how it started in February of '99. And they said, well, how long do you think it'll take? And I said, well, it's so obvious. It's so obviously different from human. And once scientists are made aware of it, they'll probably jump on it with both feet, and they'll be lined up to be the person that deals with it. So I would imagine 6 months maximum.
Sure.
And we are 14 years later. So that tells you how little I knew about what I was getting into.
Yeah.
And the level of resistance that I would meet across the board. I mean, from both mainstream science and just ordinary people who have been extremely brainwashed by the mainstream insistence that UFOs and aliens can't be real, aren't real, and that everything everybody claims is a UFO sighting or an alien encounter or whatever is all just made up in the result of fantasy or trauma or whatever. And then, that's just garbage. But it works. On the average person, that works. And so if authority speaks, they buy into it.
Sure. Well, we just had myself and Dave here had Stanton Friedman on Saturday and Kathleen Marden. So we're among critical free thinkers here, Lloyd. We're okay.
Well, Lloyd, that's a good lineup there.
What was it that convinced you, Lloyd, about the skull? Why did you become convinced that it wasn't just some kind of birth defect or congenital defect or whatever? What's so different about it from hydrocephalus or some of the other deformities that occur to skulls?
Right. Well, David, the thing was, as I took it out in '99. I began taking it to experts of various kinds in skull morphology. And every expert that I took it to had essentially the same reaction. Well, wow, boy, this is really different. I've never seen ears like this before. I've never seen inner ears like this before. So I can't really explain that, but the rest of it has to be deformity. And, oh boy, I've never seen eyes like this before. Those are really strange, but the rest of it has to be deformity. Or, boy, I've never seen a neck like this before, but really weird, but the rest has to be deformity. Or, I've never seen a brain cavity like this. It's really weird, but the rest of it has to be deformity. Well, you hear that from a couple dozen experts by the end of the year, and you realize none of them know a damn thing about it. They just don't know anything. None of them have ever seen it in their particular field of expertise, but they're sure that the whole thing has to be some kind of deformity. And that's just not true. That's just not the case. So, I took all that in, and by the end of the year, I realized, these people, they don't know. It isn't. It can't be human. If no expert can explain rationally their aspect of it, then the whole thing has to be just completely wrong. And in the end, that's what it turned out. But in hearing their descriptions of what made everything different, then you realize how much bigger the brain is, how much harder the brain is, how much harder the bone is, how much larger the inner ears are, the missing frontal sinuses, the complete redesign of the neck. The neck's half the size of our neck. The bone weighs half as much, 2 or 3 times as hard. All of that, and then to find that once we cut into it, that there were fibers woven into the matrix of the bone. I mean, durable fibers too, to add to the strength of it, like rebar through concrete. And you have that come out when that is not found in any other bone on earth that anybody knows about. You're looking at something alien. You're looking at something not from Earth. Now, it's easy for me to say that, but to get mainstream scientists to confront that and admit that, no, that isn't going to happen until it all has to be crammed down their throats. It will not go down easy. And the only way to cram it down their throats is with DNA. All these physical differences that I'm talking about, that's pretty much useless. It just doesn't have an impact on them, because all they do, they just shrug their shoulders and they say, yeah, well, nature can do anything, nature can do anything.
Even the symmetry of the skull.
The symmetry I haven't mentioned. It's astoundingly symmetric, more so than our skull.
And just Lloyd, just for the listeners, because they might not be familiar with some of these terms, can you explain these deformities and why they're used as an excuse? Like, you have the cradle boarding as an excuse, you have the hydrocephaly as an excuse, the progeria as an excuse. Maybe just explain what these things are and why they don't work, because the symmetry is the key thing that grabs me the most. The symmetry, deformity is not symmetry. And that's what dispels all these other excuses.
Symmetry, the Star Child skull is very well balanced in all of its parts. In all of its parts, it's extremely well balanced. Humans, if you look at human skulls, we're not really that symmetrical. Our faces are not symmetrical. Our skulls are not symmetrical. If you look at us, we tend to grow a little bit different on both sides. But with the Star Child, there is astonishing symmetry where we first really noticed it. You look at it overall and you notice it just to look at it. But if you stick your fingers, if you look in its eye sockets, which look like little scoops, have been taken out, very shallow compared to a human. As humans' eye sockets are 2-inch deep cones, and the Star Child is just less than half an inch deep at its maximum scoops out of the skull. And to look at them with your eyes, I defy anyone. No one can see any shifts in the terrain of the bone. It looks absolutely smooth. And yet, if you put your fingers in there and touch, because your sense of touch is much more, developed, if you put your forefinger in, you can sink them into a depression at one point of the eye socket, drag it across, it will hit a rise that you will feel, and then it will sink into another depression. You do that on the other eye socket, you get exactly the same result. Your finger sinks into the depression, it comes up over the rise, and it goes into the other depression. Exactly the same. So fine, so subtle, so precise, that your eyes can't even see it, but it is there. So that's one thing. As far as the cradle boarding hydrocephaly, which right now, if you go to Wikipedia and read what the wacky people have to say about it, and keep in mind, everybody should understand, when you go to Wikipedia for information, anything that isn't challengeable, that isn't really contestable, you want to go see how to shoe a horse. You will learn how to shoe a horse. You'll get good information on that. But if you go on Wikipedia with anything challenging a mainstream science position, what you have to understand is that Wikipedia is run by and for the mainstream position on everything. So they will not let the truth or any challenge go unassailed on the Wiki site. So when you go there, to this day, you will read that the star child has suffered hydrocephaly and cradle boarding and the same old garbage that they've had, forever pretty much, when it's been proven long ago that that wasn't true. But it's the same thing Ray and Melanie heard because it's the simple, easy, glib explanation for it. What the star child has is swelling in its parietal area. Now that's the upper part of the rear of your head. The upper part of the rear of your head. Imagine it blown out a little bit, expanded outward a little bit. And so when the scientists see any head that is swollen larger than it should be in a certain area, they say, oh, well, that's hydrocephaly. That can be explained by hydrocephaly, which is water on the brain. Everybody knows that. Everybody also knows, however, that water on the brain, really that is caused by an increase in the fluid pressure in the head, and that is uniform. It is the equivalent of blowing up a balloon with air. You cannot blow up a balloon with an odd shape. It blows up round. And just like a human head that is truly suffering from hydrocephaly will blow up round. It won't blow up with nice creases and dents in the shape and all that. So hydrocephaly was thrown out almost immediately, except, literally, I could give this lesson to a classroom of people who were severely mentally handicapped, and they would understand this. And yet, the PhDs in mainstream science cannot grasp this point. Not because they don't grasp it, they just don't want to. So they just look the other way. They pretend everything is, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Let's just all pretend. And there you see on Wacky, it still suffers from hydrocephaly. Now, as far as cradle boarding goes, the rear of the star child skull is flat-ish. When I say flat-ish, it's not entirely flat. It is flat-ish. And it is flat-ish for the entire rear of it. The entire rear of it. Now, there is a thing called cradle boarding in primitive tribes where a baby is lashed onto a board to put on the mother's back so the mother can go about doing her work. So the baby is swaddled onto the board and its head is tied down to the board because a baby's neck is so weak that if the mother, in doing her work, it makes rapid moves, the head will shift around and it'll hurt the baby's head. So you have to tie the baby's head down, not real hard, but enough to where it's going to stay on the board and not be whipped around as the mother moves. Well, in doing that, you flatten the rear of the baby's head to the shape of the board. And in fact, the human found with the star child is a classic example of cradle boarding. She is a classic example of cradle boarding right there in front of you to compare the star child to. And when that happens, because a baby's bones are so soft, they flatten to the flatness of the board, to the degree of flatness of the board. So they're as flat as your desk, as flat as your table. And sure enough, the human found with the star child, that's how flat the rear part of her head is for the area where it's flattened. And that area of flattening is what's key. If you reach around to the rear of your own head right now, everybody listening to me, you guys, reach around to the middle lower part of your own head and you will feel a knot back there, a bump. It's called the inium. Okay, now if you feel either side of that, you feel that your neck, two big neck muscles attached there on either side of that. You with me?
Yep.
Every human being is like that. We have a bump that's sort of like a bracing mechanism, and those neck muscles attach on either side of it, and our neck attaches completely around the bottom part of our skulls, from that point. So when a baby's head is cradle-boarded, the flattening never goes below the inion. It goes from the top of the crown to the inion, and it stops. Why? Because if you go past the inion, you're going to be tearing the neck muscles off.
Sure.
So that's it. The human found with the star child absolutely perfectly stops at the inion, flat from the inion up to the crown, as they always are. It's about the size of the palm of my hand. Now, you look at the star child skull, its rear is flattened out the whole rear of the head, twice the size of my hand, twice, all over, and it goes well past the inion. The flattening goes well past the inion, right down to the neck hole itself.
At an angle too, Lloyd, isn't it?
At a very steep angle, exactly. And more than that, the surface of the bone still maintains its natural convolutions. You can see the convolutions in pictures in the ebook Star Child Skull Essentials. You can see it all very clearly. And if you look even on the website, if those there are pictures there as well. You can see the convolutions. You can feel the convolutions. They're not huge. They're not monstrous. They're fairly subtle, but they're there. They're normal convolutions. They're convolutions like we have on our skull. They are normal convolutions. The star child was never cradle boarded, not for a minute, not for a second. Never happened. And again, this too, I could give this lesson, if I had the skulls and illustrations as I do in my lectures, I could show a class seriously subpar mental performers, and they would all get this. But mainstream PhDs cannot see this, cannot accept this as reality. And it isn't, again, because they can't actually see it. It's just because their position forces them to deny the reality of their eyes and their brains. It's just, it's a game we're all playing. They're all playing on their team, and I'm playing on my team. And they are obligated by being on their team to play by their team's rules, which is to, in all cases, no matter what, deny the possible existence of aliens and UFOs simply because to acknowledge their reality changes the reality of everyone in the world, and particularly their own little bailiwicks, changes those realities so profoundly that they fight it every way they can. Science's great scam on the world is that they are the cutting edge of change, when in fact science is the big dead anchor dug into the ground and dragging their heels to keep us from moving forward, because they don't want anything to go forward faster than they can all manage to deal with, including the least among them. And so they all try to, we're all going to hang. If we're going to hang, we're going to hang together.
Sure, Lloyd. I mean, they're handicapped because of work pressures, social, political pressures. These guys are not at the forefront like you make out. Lloyd, I just wanted to jump in there because let's talk about how old this skull is, because let's get into some more details. This thing's about 900 years old, yeah?
Right, 900 years old, exactly, by carbon-14 dating.
Yeah, and so the girl that found that, she was in the 1930s. Did she recognize the importance of this art? It was an artifact. She found it. Just tell us where the skull was found and the position it was found, and with the other skull.
We don't know the exact village. We know it was in the area of 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. But before she died, that's all she said. It was a small village about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. We don't know that village's name. And if you look on the map, 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua is a very large area. And she did not understand its importance. At first, she thought it was just a deformed human, like anybody would think in 1930. There was no such thing as UFOs or aliens. In 1930. It wouldn't have come into her mind. So she just thought it was some kind of strange, deformed human, and she took them as souvenirs and kept them her whole life.
And the thing is about, if it was 900 years ago, a freak or a malformity would have been very unlikely in any cultures back then, Lloyd, yeah?
That's true. They didn't, real freak. I mean, okay, let's say you're born with a hair lip, one cranial deformity. You could maybe make it on out. A double hair lip, No, you're not going to make it. 3 things wrong, not going to make it. 4 things wrong. So something like the Star Child comes along with everything wrong, with not a single thing right. That isn't going to happen. They're not going to be allowed to live and go on, because back then, infanticide, as the way we understand it today, was just not that big a deal. A bad copy comes out, throw it away and make a new one, because their new ones were coming all the time. So that's pretty much how it was. And the Star Child, something as debilitated as that would have looked relative to a normal human, it just wouldn't have been kept. That would have been the end of it.
Mm-hmm. And the Star Child has what you consider an adult tooth. Can you explain that, Lloyd? That we kind of know what age it might have been.
It had teeth in the upper piece of maxilla that was recovered. Now, here's the way that works. In your mouth, in your own mouth, put your finger right under your nose in that middle dent in your lip, and swing your finger to the right of your upper jaw. That whole area is called, the upper part is called the maxilla. So we have a right maxilla. And we had 3 teeth holes with teeth that were missing, and we had 2 teeth holes that still had teeth in them. And we could see them. And they were, human-like teeth. I don't know that they were exactly human, but they seemed human-like, except they were very small, because the Star Child's about 4 feet tall. So they were small. But what was interesting about that piece of maxilla is that the roof of the mouth was flat, not curved up so a tongue could fit in there, but flat. But yet it was eating, because there was definite signs of wear on its teeth, so you could see that it was chewing food from that era that would have been ground on a stone, mortar, and pestle, so that pieces of grit would be in with the food, and they would be eating little pieces of rock from the grinding process. So all that is visible. And so with the teeth, we know that the Star Child was an adult. Those are adult teeth, because no child could put that level of wear on the teeth that we see on them. But up in the maxilla are sitting 5 crowns ready to come down to make new teeth. Now, what does that suggest? It suggests that the Star Child could live an inordinately long time, long enough so that when the current teeth that were down wore out in any way, new teeth were up to take their place. And, of course, humans don't have that. So that's yet another of the things that the Star Child has that normal humans don't have.
Dave, do you want to jump in there for a question?
Just something that occurred to me actually while you were talking about where the skull was originally found, or the skulls were originally found. And about 900 years ago, it's Chihuahuas in the north of Mexico, isn't it?
Well, more like
Lloyd.
West, yeah.
West, yeah. It's just that was that sort of about that time? Was that when the Toltecs were their culture was flourishing?
Right. 1100 AD. Right. That would then become the Aztecs. Yes.
Yeah. I was just wondering, because of course there are a lot of indigenous legends amongst the peoples who were there before Europeans came to both the Americas, north, south, etc., about star beings, star ancestors, and some kind of connection with people who came from somewhere off planet, as we would understand it. What credence do you give to those sorts of legends, Lloyd?
Well, I absolutely give plenty of credence to it, because as soon as I started this in 1999, a woman named Dr. Paula Gunn Allen, who was a Native American, but a professor emeritus, in fact, at UCLA, contacted me to say, this thing you have, that's a star being. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, Native Americans and Indian tribes up and down the Americas, from South America all the way up, they have numerous legends of star beings that would come down to the earth, find a woman in a village, who was either barren or had no children or whatever, and they would make her pregnant with a star being. And they would tell the tribe, we're going to go away now, but this woman is going to be pregnant with a child, and when that child is born, this whole this whole village is responsible for taking care of it, and we're going to come back in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years, and we're going to pick it up, and it better be here. And that was kind of the assignment that these women would get, that you are going to raise this child up to a certain age, and then we're going to come back and get it. And so when Paula told us that, she said, so your star child, that's probably what your star child is. It's probably a human-alien hybrid that inexplicably died before it was picked back up. And this woman who had it, its mother, was so terrified that she had allowed it to die that she drug it way out into the middle of nowhere, into that mine tunnel, to get away from everybody, in the hope that maybe her village would be spared if she would go and bury it and die herself, which she did. She buried it and then committed suicide. So that, absent a better working theory, I went with that. It sounds good to me.
I think you guys have seen my tomorrow schedule. I have Nancy Red Star from the Cherokee tribe talking about star ancestors. So,
well, there you go. That should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the show tomorrow now.
Paula died 3 or 4 years ago, unfortunately, but that was her work. She was written, papers and things, books about it. So. Anyway, I went with that for the first few years, and then later we found out that, with the most recent DNA analysis, we found that, in fact, there is no human connection to the star child at all. It is purely alien. Its DNA indicates very clearly that it had both an alien father and an alien mother. It is just an alien, period. And when we are able to sequence the entire genome, when we have the money to do that, and it's really all we're waiting for now, is for those guys down in Tampa to find a way to gather up the money, the few $2 million that we need to do it, and then we'll get it done. And when we do, we will be able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the star child is indeed an alien, wall to wall, top to bottom, in and out.
Let's tell us a bit about that, Lloyd, because it's quite an expensive business, the DNA process, the measurements, and the science is changing all the time, Lloyd, isn't it?
Right. It is, but it isn't for ancient DNA. The science for living DNA has changed phenomenally. Right now, you and I could have our entire genomes, all 3+ billion base pairs, 3,200,000 some odd, base pairs sequenced for about $10,000 US.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
About $1,000. I know.
And what could that tell you, Lloyd, if you did have that done?
Well, there are a number of genes now that are pegged as being the problem to cause certain genetic disorders, and we have over 4,000. The human genome carries over 4,000 genetic disorders. So we don't know where all 4,000 of them lie, but we do know where several of them lie. And you might have recalled that all the big news, the brouhaha about Angelina Jolie finding that she had one of the genetic flaws for breast and ovarian cancer. So
sure.
she took precautions against that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we all can do. We all can start comparing our genomes to the diseases out there that we will be subject to, and we can try to do some preventive measures if we choose to. The day will come in the not too distant future when that test goes from $10,000 to say $100, and when that happens, probably every baby born will be given the option, the parents will be given the option of being told what this baby is going to be susceptible to. Because of those 4,000 genetic disorders that our gene pool carries, individually we only carry about 200 each. only about 200 of those 4,000. But my 200 and my partner's 200, or your 200 and your partner's 200, they're not in every case. That's where you get these deformities that come out of apparently nowhere. It's when one mate carries his 200 and the other mate carries her 200, and when you line up and see where the problem areas are, in each one where there's an overlap with a deformity, each of their children is going to have a 1 in 4 chance of that deformity expressing.
Mm.
Now, in my family, for example, there is one of my nephews has a son who's perfect, a second son who has one of the worst genetic disorders you can have. It's called Angelman syndrome. And then they were told by their doctor, if you want to have any more children, each one of them is going to have a 1 in 4 chance of expressing this disorder. So they gambled on a third son, and he came out fine too. That's how it works. So those genes are out there, and that's the use of recovering the full genome. But with something that's been dead for a long time, ancient DNA, okay?
Yeah.
That isn't like you and me. That is, if the sequences of our genes are unraveled and uncoiled, they'll unspool beautifully. The new sequencers can do that, and it comes out in long, well put together strings that are easy to read. But when you die, as your DNA begins to break down in all of your cells, the nucleus of all of your cells, it breaks down into little bitty segments, little 20, 30, 50, 200, 300, 400, small, tiny, tiny, tiny. It's like, imagine our DNA being put through a wood chipper. That's really the effect that you get.
Right.
So collecting, sweeping up those chips off the floor like glitter, just imagine a glitter bag just thrown out onto the floor. Now you're going to sweep that up and you're going to put it all together and make a genome out of it. You can do it. They've done it with the Neanderthal. They've done it with Denisova. They're doing it with dinosaurs and, different things like that have been dead for a long time. But it's possible to do it. It's doable. It's just very, very expensive and labor intensive and requires very special handling and tools and people and skills and all that. But it's doable. So like anybody else, we just need the money and we can get it done.
So tell me, Lloyd, how are you getting on with raising the money? What's the sum and what's the resources? Do you need help with that? Is there any campaigns that you're doing?
Now we need the whole wad. Basically, we're going to try in the next several months. The guys in Tampa are going to try to put together a Kickstarter campaign to see if we can get the donations through there. Now, frankly, I'll be honest with you, I'm very skeptical that can work, but there are not many other ways to do it. You can't really talk rich people into it because rich people, for the most part, and I've talked to a bunch of them, and this is just my interpretation of them, rich people tend to be very arrogant about the fact that they're rich, and they tend to think that because they're smart about whatever allowed them to make their money, that they know everything there is worth knowing. And so when you come in and you tell them something like this, you don't know anything about this. This is, you're completely deluded if you buy what mainstream science says, you're just wrong. This is the real reality of things. And I'm just boiling it down.
Yeah.
You don't go in and talk that bluntly and that rudely to them. I'm just boiling it down. But in the end, that's your message to them. What you think you know about aliens is not right. And the answer, they come back, the statement they come back with, well, how can you be right and all of them be wrong? How can you be right and all of them be wrong when they're the experts? They're the people we're supposed to believe.
Apparent experts, Lloyd.
It's extremely difficult to overcome. So I don't hold out any hope for rich people coming forward and doing this, not because they don't have the money and not because they're not intelligent people, but they are thoroughly brainwashed to believe the mainstream line, and they can't bring themselves to even look. I mean, we have a standing offer to anybody here that's, a serious potential investor. Sign a non-disclosure agreement, Go to the lab, talk to the geneticist, see the equipment, see everything, see it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Take his word for it. He is an expert, right? Who is he? Well, we can't tell you, because if we tell you who he is, then he'll be out of a job and we won't have, so you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. But it isn't like we're trying to hide. We just have to protect him, because everybody knows that if he were to come out of the shadows before he has the whole genome, he would lose his job. That's the way the conservatives on the other side play hardball. I mean, they really maintain discipline in the ranks by getting rid of anybody that steps out of line. That's just, everybody knows that's how it works. So we need 5 million. We need 3 million to do the gene recovery, the genome recovery. And then we need a couple of million to document it in a documentary film, with which we can pay back the money easily. Well, that's the irony of this, James, is that it isn't that much money in the relative scheme of things. A $5 million investment, not that big. For some of the ridiculous things that people with money out in Silicon Valley and Wall Street and places like that, the ridiculous things they'll put money into, the Star Child is just a absolute lead pipe cinch. And it will pay its money back. Can you imagine a documentary film chronicling the discovery of the first alien? It'll play everywhere in the world.
It would make it back on YouTube alone, Lloyd.
Yeah, it did, but it wouldn't. I mean, we're talking theaters. We're talking a $2 million film is a theater quality documentary film.
Yeah.
Shot in high D, the whole 9 yards. If you're going to do this, I mean,
do it right. Do it right, Lloyd.
What if somebody had the opportunity to follow the Wright brothers out to Kitty Hawk and could film the whole first flight, start to finish? What would that be worth? Well, that's essentially what we have here. It's like, going to the moon and filming that. What is that film worth? Worth a lot. So,
like the movie, if you build it, they will come.
Exactly. You can't really get rich people to see that. I've really been shocked, really, at the depth of their ignorance about the world around them, because they get so focused in on, again, what has made them rich, that's just about all they know. Yeah. And so they're abysmally ignorant about the rest of the world. And yet, because they've made money and they're wealthy and all that, they feel themselves to be ipso facto smart on everything. And it's just extremely difficult to deal with them. So that's why the businessmen in Tampa are going to try, because when I took it to them, they said, oh, we know all kind of people with money. Oh, this is going to be easy. Oh, we'll get this in no time. After just a few interviews, the guy just comes back with his tail between his legs and he says, you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. This is not going to be easy at all. Because I've been trying it for years.
But the thing is, Lloyd, from what I gather in Starsoil Essentials, you've got good reason there to go with this now. You've had some success. It's been a long, drawn-out process, and it's taken you... And it's commendable that you are going at this thing 14 years, Lloyd. First and foremost, I commend you on that, because it's a difficult journey for you personally. I can see that, but you have good evidence with this DNA run you've done so far.
Well, we've got it in the bag. I mean, it's in the bag. We've got now hundreds of millions. Understand, guys, we have hundreds of millions of base pairs. Not just a few dozen, not just a few hundred, not just a few thousand, hundreds of millions. Now, again, out of 3 billion plus, it's still a percentage. And so the other side gets to say, the mainstream gets to say, oh, well, that's just a partial result. You can't believe that. You can't trust that. That doesn't mean anything. It's just a partial result. Yeah, well, okay, it's a partial result. But on a percentile basis, you can extrapolate pretty easily. If you have this in this X amount of DNA, you're going to have that in that amount of DNA. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and when you do that, you're going to be so far away from human, it's ridiculous. So,
is it the FOXP2 gene that's so important? The number of mutations on that really, is the solid stuff that holds up your case.
Important, but you got to understand the FOXP2 is one fragment. We have 4 fragments of the mitochondrial DNA. Now, 4 fragments trump 1, even though it's FOXP2. Now, FOXP2 is important, but it's the 4 pieces of the mitochondrial DNA that are the most important. But we did that back in 2011. We don't even bother with trying to break it down anymore because people don't listen. The mainstream doesn't listen. The arguments from it was, look, it doesn't matter if you stack up 10,000 physical differences. It doesn't matter. All we have to say is God can do anything, and that's the end of the subject. That's the end of the discussion. So not God can do anything. Sorry, nature can do anything. Say nature can do anything, and we beat you. Well, now that we are dealing with the DNA, and we've come as far as we have, they say, well, it doesn't matter what you have, how much you have, partial. As long as it's partial, we can say it's just partial. It's not a full, it's not a full genome, and therefore it doesn't count. And that's kind of the rules that we have to play by. Even though if it was them, if one of them, if Svante Pabo, for example, at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, when he comes out and says we have a partial result and this is what it indicates, everybody falls over dead because they know that he and the Max Planck Institute are going to deliver the whole process in the end. We can say it, but we can't get any respect because we're not Svante Pabo. So, and we're not the Max Planck. But we have all of the assets and all of the things that those guys can do there, we could do at our lab if we had the money to do it. If we had the money and the equipment and the manpower, we can do what they can do, what anybody can do. This is not, the new joke, this is not rocket surgery.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I see with the DNA evidence. This is worthy of actually having a go at, because tell us, maybe just on this note then, tell us about the geneticist when he had the no significant similarity found results.
Yeah, well, when he first started, the way that happened was he contacted me and he said, okay, look, a friend of my wife, he's a mainstream scientist, so his first thought was it was just a bunch of garbage. So he said, look, my wife, a friend of hers, read your ebook and convinced my wife to read it. My wife read it. My wife was convinced that you're a legitimate guy. She convinced me to read it. So I've read it. And actually, you do sound like you could be a legitimate guy. But if you're legitimate, I will make you an offer. I am a geneticist working at a top genetics lab. It's my lab. I run it. I will give you some information about your situation if you will give me a sample. I said, what's your address? And so I sent it to him, and a few weeks later he got back, and he said, okay, you have something here, because I've sent my first recovery, which was at that time about 30,000 base pairs, 30,000. Mm-hmm. I've sent that to the big NIH, the National Institutes of Health database, which has pretty much the genomes of every animal that the government has funded for the sequencing of their genome. And in that database, and this is now middle 210, he said at this point, about half of the star child shows segments that are similar to either human or other things living on Earth. He says, but the amazing thing is about half of it is coming back not found in the database. He says, if you've got half of this thing not showing up in the earthly DNA database, you really have something here.
It's the pink elephant in the room, as they say, Lloyd.
Yeah, elephant in the room. Yeah, exactly. So it was really a moment of celebration and excitement and all that for both of us. And I said, well, look, this is yours to run with if you want to. And he says, I definitely want to because I know where it's going to end. And so we've just been working at it for the last, 3 years now. We're in our third year and with him and just, plowing ahead.
That sounds promising that you got a good geneticist on your side too, Lloyd.
Very, very lucky to find a guy with not just the smarts to do it, but the cojones to put him on the line.
Yeah.
And risk his job, which is a very good job, to do this.
Sure. Dave, have you any questions before we move on to the intervention theory?
Not really, no. I mean, it sort of actually bridges the Star Child skull and the intervention theory. So I've just got one question to ask. I mean, quite rightly, Lloyd, all the work you've done on the Star Child has emphasized and shown and demonstrated the differences that there are between the human physiology and the Star Child's and now the genetics as well. But also there are similarities, aren't there, in the sense that at a very basic level, that it's a skull. It has eye sockets, albeit very different. It has a bone structure, albeit very different, etc. And of course, it has DNA, albeit very different. And I just wanted to get your reflections on that, really.
Well, on the fact that, I'm not sure I understand the question, just that it's a skull. And
well, assuming for a moment that you're absolutely right, that this is some kind of extraterrestrial skull, it does imply that there is some kind of common structure to life forms throughout the universe.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it does. There is a life code. I'm convinced that the code of life that exists on planet Earth is the code of life for at least our galaxy and very likely the universe. There is one single code of life because it's just so incredibly complicated. So incredibly complicated. And yet when you boil it down to its basics, it's just made up of nucleotides that are the equivalent of the 0 and the 1 of computers. So you have infinite simplicity capable of creating infinite complexity. So that life code did not, number one, this is what my intervention theory work is about. The life code that's here on Earth, it was not generated here by a lightning bolt hitting molecules, inert molecules, in a warm pond of water, and somehow that swirled into the first living thing. That is every bit as miraculous as the Adam and Eve story and God did it all and all that. Science is in that respect no better than religion. Now, I'm not a creationist. I'm not arguing for creationism. Both of those theories, creationism and Darwinian evolution or Darwinism, whatever you want to call it, those are both ridiculously wrong, just absurdly wrong. So what is the truth? Well, the truth is going to be in the middle ground between those two theories. And that middle ground is intervention, that there is something outside of Earth, outside of us, that controls our destiny. And for me, it goes back to the actual beginning of the solar system, to the beginning of Earth itself. I believe, and I think the evidence is very clear, that Earth has been terraformed from the very beginning, from 4.5 billion years ago, when it was coalescing out of the cloud of dust and gas that supposedly the sun and the solar system came out of, coalesced from. At whatever point you want to go back there, 4.5 to 4 billion years ago, somewhere in there, somebody came along and noticed this new forming solar system, and they said, there's some planets here that might be in the zone of life of this sun when everything settles down in a few billion years. Let's go ahead and put some early life form here, some prokaryotes, so whichever of these forming planets ends up in the zone of life, they will have a kickstart on life. And so that's what happened. We got our prokaryotes at about 4 billion years ago. Now, understand, guys, this is what's key. For a solar system, when planets are forming, to create a planet that is remotely like Earth, somebody has to intervene on that. You can't just get that. Because what happens is you have a cooling ball of lava. Where is that cooling ball of lava floating? It's floating in space. What is the key feature of space? It is phenomenally cold. Phenomenally cold. So that as the seething magma hits space with no atmosphere to buffer it, to protect it, what happens? It freezes. It goes cold. It turns into a rock. So those planets that are left to their own devices in the emptiness of space do what? They just turn into hard rocks. And that's what you see with the moons and most of what's out there. Now, if they have seething, ongoing magma the way we do, that sends streamers of it up out of holes in the crust that forms, then you can get steam coming up and vapors, and they can begin to form an atmosphere. But certain things have to happen for that to happen. All of the things that Earth needed, and I go over this in detail in the book, in the ebook, Intervention Theory Essentials, for those who want to learn more about it. But everything Earth needed at every single point to be a certain way for Earth to turn out the way it turned out, that happened. And it happened just when it needed to happen. And it's all there. You can see the handiwork of the terraformers. You can see their hands at work. You can see the results. You can see the remains of the terraformers that built the Earth. Now, I don't want to confuse the terraformers who built the Earth and have overseen the development of our entire solar system, and probably a number of other solar systems in the galaxy, if not all of them. But whoever those terraformers are, they are not the individuals, the beings that created us. I think a separate set of individuals did that, and I think those are, with lacking any better proof of otherwise, I go with Sitchin's theory of the Anunnaki. And I think the Anunnaki, who themselves would have been created, or their planet would have been terraformed by the terraformers, and who themselves would have been created by somebody, they created us to be their slaves and servants while they were here on Earth. And I think the evidence is very clear of that there was Earth at a certain time when the Anunnaki arrived, and at the end of their stay here, you had humans who were part of the domesticated animal crop and domesticated plants. The Anunnaki created not just us while they were here, but to be their slaves and servants, but they created a number of domesticated plants and a number of domesticated animals. And they did all of that, including us, with genetic engineering, because they knew how to do that. And so to make this planet, which was not their planet, more comfortable for them, more habitable for them, they genetically engineered what they needed from either what was here or they had it brought from their planet. For example, the banana just seems to come out of nowhere. And the banana is one of the very best fruits for humans that there is. No track record where you can see the banana coming, boom, banana's here. And there are other crops like that too, and maybe some animals as well. You get all kinds of debates about this. But the point is, domesticated animals and domesticated plants show the handiwork of those who were genetically manipulating them. But perhaps nobody shows it as clearly as humans do. It is so blindingly obvious that we are the product of genetic engineering. It's ridiculous. And yet, of course, the mainstream has no choice but to say, oh, no. All those things that look like they are genetic engineering have a mundane answer. Those things can happen, da-da-da-da. I've seen it all. I go through this routinely. BS. That is just garbage. It's the same kind of excuses they put out about why UFOs can't be real, why Bigfoot can't be real, why hominoids can't be real. These are things that are so big, it will, if not knock them out of the power seats that they currently enjoy, the catbird seats that they currently enjoy, as the arbiters of our knowledge and understanding of things. If it doesn't knock them out, it will rattle them so bad that the catbird seat will vibrate for years, and they know that.
Lloyd, sorry, Lloyd, I just want to jump in there.
Sure.
Just at the start of the Intervention Theory Essentials book, which is fantastic, by the way, so much information in there. You mentioned directed panspermia, and I had first heard about this from the Walter Crick thing, the discoverer of the double helix, yeah? And he talked... he talked about directed panspermia. This is to do with the complexity of life and that it couldn't have actually naturally developed. Is that correct? Could you explain that?
Yes. It could not have developed the way it's pretended. And you have that picture in the ebook of the yellow brick road, of the inorganic molecules supposedly waltzing down the magical yellow brick road and coming out at the end of that organic. It just didn't. It just didn't happen. It can't happen. To this day, nobody has been able to assemble even the most basic parts of it in a lab. In a lab, much less in a warm pond somewhere getting hit by lightning. Now, they say that, the test where they did the lightning bolt, and they made some of the building, they call them the building blocks of life. And they're the building blocks. So now we can, because we see some building blocks, we can explain the Empire State Building. It's absolutely absurd.
I never understood that, Lloyd, why they need a lightning bolt on the primitive
because there was nothing else going on 4 billion years ago that had any generative power to do anything, to change anything. Mm. I mean, there's no power in the water. Things are just floating around in the water. They're going to just float. Something has to act on them. And so somebody says, well, why don't we just say it was hit by a lightning bolt? That ought to work. and yeah, okay, fine, except 4 billion years ago, who says you had lightning bolts back then? How do you have lightning bolts when you don't have an atmosphere? So, it's just absurd, guys. It is the biggest wink, wink, nudge, nudge imaginable is that mainstream science tries to pretend and has tried to pretend all these years that that's true, even to this day when they absolutely know, they know if I know, they know I took all my information from there. They know what I know, but they cannot admit it because then the great unwashed, the great average person out there might question what they're being told about other things. Can't have that. Can't have any acknowledgement of fault or doubt. And so they just pretend these absurd things are real when they're not even in the ballpark of reality.
Sure. I have definitely come to believe that this whole Darwinian thing is a fallacy. I've had Michael Cremo on the show, Lloyd. I think you've met Michael before.
I know Michael is a good friend.
Yeah, and so, I mean, whether you're talking intelligent design or creationists, I think what they do is dismantle this Darwinian fallacy, and that's a good thing. I don't necessarily know if I agree with you. I would actually swing to the interventionist side of things probably more than anything. But regardless, at the end of the day, I have come to believe that Darwinian evolution is a joke. It's not even not wrong. It's not even wrong. It's a joke. It's absolutely just a pure fallacy. And in some cases, evidence has been faked to support their theory.
You got to understand what Darwin did and what Darwin said. Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands and he chronicled what's called microevolution, which is evolution in parts of bodies, in finches and tortoises and things like that. And you can have that, and that's recordable, and that's all around us. Microevolution does exist, micro in parts. And then Darwin extrapolated, and that's all, that, well, if we can see evidence of microevolution in X number of years, then why could we not have macroevolution, whole body change, over many millions of years? Why not? And so that was his great postulation. But he said very clearly, however, if intermediate species cannot be found, if things can't be seen in the act of growing from one thing to another, of changing from one thing to another, if those intermediate species cannot be seen or found, then of course my theory is wrong, and somebody else has to come up with something better. Well, what happened was, within 10 years, there were major attacks going on against Darwinian evolution, and it was obvious that he was wrong. But what had happened in those 10 years is that religion had been thoroughly dislodged from its power chair, from its catbird seat as the arbiter of common knowledge. And science had taken over the seat. And so they weren't about to give that seat back to religion after they had fought so hard to take it away. And so there was this ongoing struggle. And even after they realized that Darwin, that the intermediate species were not showing up and that Darwin was very likely wrong, by then they had a vested interest in maintaining the fallacy of Darwinian evolution. And so they do that to this day, and they do it rigorously. They do it viciously.
Mm. Dave, you want to jump in there for a minute?
Well, I was just wondering, because Darwin didn't know anything about DNA, did he? I mean, all his conclusions were drawn from morphology, basically the shapes of skulls or bone formations in fossils, etc., or living creatures as well. I mean, what does sort of the neo-Darwinist view of things, which involves looking at DNA structures, how's that dogma been crystallized with the neo-Darwinists, Lloyd?
They tried to come up with something called punctuated equilibrium, because they recognize that there is no such thing as gradual changing from one species into another species. There's microevolution. You can have speciation. One type of rat becomes two types of rats, becomes three types of rats over time. They're still rats, just like the finches became, different finches on different islands became a different separate species. That's called speciation. They're still finches. They're still rats. They're not changing into dogs. They're not changing from finches into pigeons. It isn't happening. It never happened. Never gonna happen. So what the fossil record shows, in fact, is that things exist pretty much as they are when they appear. They appear in the fossil record. They stay as they are until they disappear in the fossil record.
Are we talking the Cambrian explosion here, Lloyd?
Right, everything, not just that and everything, but although a huge amount of it came in the Cambrian explosion, which is totally inexplicable because there was nothing to lead into it. It just, boom, it happened. But what they've noticed is that things kept appearing, staying pretty much the same in what is called stasis, and then going extinct to be and have their niche be replaced by something else, maybe radically different from them. And so those young Turks with the nerve to do that came up with something called punctuated equilibrium, which acknowledged that it looked like in the fossil record.
It's quite an abstract name too, Lloyd. They put these abstract names on these theories to confuse people outside it. I mean,
well, it's they don't want the great unwashed to get anywhere near understanding how little they actually know about anything.
Fancy names.
Yeah. So anyway, the punctuated equilibrium came out, and it was, of course, roundly criticized by traditional Darwinists. The guys who were promoting it were just trying to get closer to reality, which is that there is no such thing as gradual or full evolution in the sense that Darwin suggested that it might be real. He never said, I saw it, it's real, here it is. That was microevolution. Macroevolution, which is what we're talking about, evolution from one whole type into one phenotype into another type phenotype. That macroevolution just does not happen. Never has happened, never gonna happen. There is no such thing as Darwinian evolution, as Darwin proposed it, or just standard evolution as evolution is promoted today. That is just a joke, and it will be proven to be over time. I don't know when, but in time, people are going to have to move to the truth. In the end, the truth will out, and the truth is that there is no such thing as macroevolution on this planet. It just doesn't happen. Things get brought here. Again and again and again, things get brought here by, I think, the terraformers.
You go into a few different human species on this planet. When I say, they talk about there's variations of humans. They talk about the Neanderthals, the Nosopha man, and now these human hobbits in the Flores in Indonesia. Let's talk about the Neanderthals, because these guys fascinate me, Lloyd.
Well, the Neanderthals and the hobbits and the Denisova, all of these guys, they're not prehumans. Don't think of them as prehumans.
Right. These guys are just, we have to think of them in terms of base pairs and how different they are to us. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, it isn't just that. I mean, they're similar to us, not entirely like us, but similar to us. Like chimps. I mean, chimps are like 98% the same as us. So Neanderthals would be 99 to 99.5% the same. But we're 99.9% the same as each other. So we're exactly what we are. We're clones. We're very much like clones, and that is what we pretty much are. So, but with the hominoids, with the Neanderthal, Denisova, and the hobbits, those are hominoids. Those are not pre-humans, even though we're all told that they're pre-humans, that we all descend from creatures like that. The fact of it is, those creatures are covered in hair, and they are hominoids. And they are not humans, never were humans, never going to be humans, and they still exist to this day. They live on
individual species in a way, then.
Absolutely. You can go out there. Eventually, you're going to find a creature called an Alma somewhere in Russia, in Russia.
Sure.
You could have here. They have them here. In every continent except Antarctica, you have them. Hominoids. And it's just a matter of time before one is captured or killed that will leave no shadow of a doubt that hominoids are real. And when that happens, everyone is going to make the link almost immediately that, whoa, this looks just like a Neanderthal skeleton. Or this looks just like a Denisova skeleton, or like a Hobbit skeleton if it's one of the pygmy kinds. But those people, just like everything else, the mainstream has convinced so many people that hominoids just can't be real. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, the abominable snowman, that's just a prop. Just like UFOs can't be real. And people buy that brainwashing, they buy into it, and they accept it. But the truth of it is, this is why I call my book, the thing that made me famous in this field, Everything You Know Is Wrong. Because everything you think you know about reality is wrong. And I hate to be as blunt and dogmatic as that, but that is the way it is. And if I don't say it and say it strenuously and loudly, people don't hear it. Because it's like, no, it can't be that. I already know that answer. No, you don't know that answer. You're totally wrong if you think what the mainstream tells you is the truth. If you trust the mainstream on anything at all that challenges a mainstream paradigm, then you're making a very big mistake, because they are lying to you, period, to protect the paradigm. They are not in their jobs to make big changes. They are in their jobs to keep things the way they are. And they're having a good ride now. And they don't want that apple cart to be upset by people like me or any of the others, Michael Primo, Stanton Friedman, anybody like that.
Sure.
In the field, we're working to upend their lives, to turn their lives inside out. And that's the last thing they want to deal with.
Sure. I think Michael Cremo has done an absolute credit to alternative knowledge. He really has produced a wealth. I have a lot of time for Michael.
Yeah, because he is extremely good at what he does.
Yeah, very intelligent guy now as well. Very knowledgeable, very intelligent. I guess I just want to tell us about the Russian hominid Zana that you talk about. This is the most fascinating thing that I liked about Intervention Theory Essentials, Lloyd.
Yeah, when people find out about Zana, they're fascinated by her because her story really is absolutely gripping.
Gripping.
And more than that, it's extremely well documented by the Russians who did the work at the time. Zana was the kind of hominoid that is Neanderthal, an Alma's type. She was, quote, man-sized, and when we say man-sized, we mean 5 to 7 feet tall in that range. She was, a little over 6 feet, a female, of course, and she was captured at an age no one really understands, but about 1850. And she came to live in a village called Tikhina in Russia, near what's called the Moscow River. It's just in the backwoods, in this village Tikhina was. And she lived there for 40 years. Now, they put her in a wooden stockade pen for some 2 or 3 years just to break her spirit, which it took that long to do, to tame her. She was a wild animal. But they were feeding her, and eventually, when they finally let her out, she'd go out, but she'd come back to where she was fed. And so then they made a kind of shelter for her under the house of the main man of the village, Ejijanaba. And so she was there to do the grunt work. Every village in that area, Xana was not the only captured hominoid that was enslaved and forced to do menial labor, because they were a wonderful, wonderful asset to a village like that. You could send her out to get the firewood, and because she's 5 to 10 times stronger, hominoids are 5 to 10 times stronger, like primates. They're just upright primates. Primates are 5 to 10 times physically stronger than we are. So she could go out and bring back, 100 pounds of wood in her arms, no problem. And so she could go get water by the bucketful down at the river, no problem. Didn't run out of steam at all. So she could carry huge grains of meal to the mill to be ground and then bring them back. She did grunt work. That's what they were made into slaves, males and females. But the females were also turned into sex slaves to the local men who could stand their body odor. And so over her 40 years, she went through probably countless thousands of sexual encounters with men and boys in that area. Why not? She's there. She's free for the taking. Why not? So in those years, those 40 years and those thousands of times, 8 times, she became pregnant with men of the village. And she ended up giving birth all 8 times, no problem. But the first 4 times, she took the baby immediately to the river, which is an ice cold freezing river, to wash it off. And of course, the shock of that killed her, because it was so much more human than it was like her. And so the natives of the village realized that she was producing kids that looked human. So on the last 4, as soon as she had the kid, they took it away from her before she could take it down and kill it.
Wow.
Inadvertently. That's what her people do with the newborn. They wash it off. It's prepared. It's got what it needs to survive the dunking, and there you go. So those kids were raised by people in the village as humans. And they grew up to be very much more like human than like her. And her youngest son, Fit, was buried in the same, and when she died in 1890, by the way, she was buried in the village cemetery. And there were, in the 1960s, when this research was being done in great detail, in the 1960s, there were over a dozen people still alive who had been at her funeral, who there watched her being buried. But they couldn't agree where in the cemetery it was, and this is a Muslim area, so they don't mark the graves.
Yeah.
So there was too much conflict between the surviving people about where in the cemetery she was buried to go just, and of course there was no way to just take a bulldozer and dig the whole place up. That wasn't going to happen. So the problem for the researchers was, doggone, it would be great to dig up her tomb if we knew where it was. And so the villager says, well, her son is right here. We buried him 10 years ago. Her youngest son, Fit, they knew right where he was. And so he was able to be dug up. And when they dug him up, and you can see photographs of him in my book, Intervention Theory Essentials. You see photographs of him, and you see his skull, and you see how Neanderthal it looks, how rugged it looks. It certainly doesn't look like entirely like a human skull. And everyone agreed that Fit and her other children as well had aspects of her in them, her personality, her darker skin, her thick hair, but not covered with body hair the way she was. They came out mostly human. And so there's a lot of debate about how that could happen if she was indeed a primate with 48 chromosomes and mixing with humans who have 46. How could that happen genetically? Same way that horses and donkeys can produce mules. Different chromosome count, but you get a creature that is functional, but mules tend to be sterile. And so the theory has come out, the mistaken theory that when you make hybrids like that from different genome amounts, different gene amounts, chromosome amounts, that it isn't going to work out right. It's not true. Every once in a while, you do get a fertile mule, female mule. You do. It happens. So, and what they will do is they will proceed to produce offspring that that track back to the originals, either a horse or a donkey. So, and not looking really like a mule. So, because males, jacks are never, so far as anybody knows, fertile, and so you can't mix the two of those. Anyway, the point is, Xana was real. They have enormous documentation from Russia. She did produce those children. Those children are real, and her offspring are there in Russia living right now, her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It would be very easy if you could go there to get some of their blood and test their mitochondrial DNA, which is her mitochondrial DNA, by the way, because that passes down to the line.
Yeah.
Is anybody doing that? No. Is anybody even trying to do that? Not that I'm aware of. Would I do that if I had the money? If somebody gave me the money to do it, I'd be on the next plane.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Lloyd, I just want to, just because you were talking chromosomes there, and we're coming up to close to the end, so I want to run through a couple of things. I think it was Alan Alford's book that I had once read a long time ago, who was closely associated with Sitchin's work, and he talked about these chromosomes, that humans have this 46 and the chimps are 8, and that these 46 chromosomes, we look unusual compared to all the other chromosomes because we have like the last two are fused, and people say that this is evidence of, genetically altered species, that somebody has genetically altered us humans, that our last two chromosomes are fused. Is that good, strong evidence that we were genetically altered? Is that strong evidence in itself?
That's some of the strongest evidence, guys. And since we are out of time, at this point, the audience, anybody that's really interested in looking at why humans are clearly genetically engineered, in the ebook, Intervention Theory Essentials, I hate to keep plugging it, but if you go there, there is a good section toward the end of 30 or 40 pages that goes over the various aspects of how we know that we are genetically engineered, and in particular, we look at the fusion of those two chromosomes. And it's sometimes difficult to understand when you try to put it into words, so there's plenty of pictures throughout the whole ebook. You guys can verify that. Throughout the whole ebook, many illustrations and photos to make what the words clear and understandable. And perhaps nowhere is that more valuable than in this explanation of how we know that humans are genetically engineered, because the evidence is obvious in our genomes.
Sure, I will commend you on that, Lloyd. It's a very well illustrated book, and that's essential too, and that is essential to do that, Lloyd, and that's what I liked about the Intervention Theory Essentials, that there's good diagrams, there's good pictures, and well documented in that respect. Dave, do you want to wrap anything up there before we go?
Well, just to add to what you just said, because I think it's also written in a very accessible style. I mean, it deals with technical subject matter, but it's written in such a way that the layperson can understand it fully.
I think, guys, that if I was gifted with anything in life, it was that gift to take complicated things and make them simple for ordinary folks to understand. And I think that's what showed in my first book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and what has shown the work that I've done since, and it's the work that I want to continue to do, because I think that I was given this gift, and I want to make as much use of it as I can for as long as I can, because I really think it helps people to understand, or at least to get closer to the real truth about our existence, and not, the garbage that we're fed by the mainstream just to suit in particular financial and emotional needs.
And where do we get the books, Lloyd?
Well, you just go to lloydpye.com, LLOYDPYE.com, and they're very easy to subscribe to there, to download. If you have any problems, I'm lloydpye@gmail.com, LLOYDPYE@gmail.com. But most people don't have a problem. It's very easy to go on and download them. It's just, everybody knows by now how to purchase a book online. That's all you have to do.
Sure. And you're open to do any speaking events when you come to London?
I'm very, very open, and I would like you to help let people know that I'm going to be in London all of August of 2013 and September of 2013. Mm-hmm. So that would like to have me come and speak about these subjects. I have very good lectures worked up with very good slides, and I would be happy to come. Just please write me at that same email, lloydpye@gmail, LLOYDPYE.com, at Gmail, and I will tell you what I require. And I'm not egregious, I'm not out of line, and I would hope that we could work something out.
Sounds fascinating, Lloyd. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. It really has. I feel I've definitely been enlightened on some definitely genetics knowledge and some alternative theories and alternative knowledge. I've definitely come away a lot more fruitful today. So pleasure having you on the show, Lloyd.
Well, thank you, James, and thank you, David, for being part of it. It's been very important for me, too. You guys are obviously knowledgeable in what you're doing, and it's always a real pleasure to speak to somebody like that. And I look forward to maybe our paths crossing again when I'm in England over these next 2 months. I hope so.
Sure.
Indeed,
well,
yes.
I might actually see you in London, Lloyd, because I do go once a month, so we might even do a video podcast if you're up for it.
All right, well, let's try to work it out. And I don't know that I would do very well in Ireland because of my accent, but maybe.
Yeah, not to worry, Lloyd. Not to worry. We'll accept you and warmly and welcome you anyway. But
all right. So you guys have a good one. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you down the line.
Thanks again, Lloyd. You take care.
All right. Cheers. Bye.